Good morning. I'm State Representative Danilo Burgos of Philadelphia, Chair of the Consumer Protection Technology and Utilities Committee. Thank you all for attending this important informational briefing on PFAS, chemicals and legislative efforts to limit their exposure. No, it is on. Okay. It's on. Maybe I was too far. Today we will focus on understanding the pervasive nature of these forever chemicals in consumer products and their documented health impacts. Our objective is to evaluate potential policy and regulatory solutions to protect our constituents, and hold polluters accountable. I look forward to an informative discussion with our experts and colleagues as we work towards comprehensive science-based solutions that safeguard public health. For the benefit of the members and our guests, this informational meeting is being recorded and streamed live on the caucus YouTube channel. Testifiers are reminded to keep their oral testimony to under 5 minutes. It's 2 for you. The members have received in advance your written testimony. We will now begin with our first panel testifiers. But first, I will grant the maker of the bill, Representative Greg Scott of Montgomery County, for some remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and for having me here today, and thank you, Ranking Chair Metzger. Sure. Sorry.
Hello? Yeah.
Hello.
Test, yeah, nothing.
All right. Do you want to keep going? Okay. Good morning. Thank you, Chair Burgos, and thank you, Ranking Chair Metzger, for allowing me the opportunity to speak this morning. Today, we are here to address a pressing issue that affects the health and safety of all Pennsylvanians. It's a substance commonly known as PFAS. PFAS are a group of chemicals of over 9,000 human-made forever chemicals that are renowned for their ability to repel dirt, water, and grease, making them prevalent in a wide range of products. However, their durability comes at a steep cost. They persist and they do not break down in the environment, posing serious environmental and health risk. Scientific research has consistently shown that exposure to PFAS can lead to severe health issues, including reproductive harm, developmental delays in children, and disruption of hormonal functions. These risks demand our immediate action and attention. We are committed to creating and examining legislation that seeks to ban the intentional use of PFAS in industrial applications while making necessary exceptions for essential uses. My goal and the goal of the co-primes of my legislation, a bipartisan group of legislators, might I add, is to ensure that we craft the most effective policies to protect our communities. I want to thank you again for this opportunity today. This is a wide-ranging chemical that has affected large swaths of our community, particularly the fire service, members of our fire service, volunteer firefighters all across not just the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but across this country. And hopefully we can do something about it and moving forward today. So thank you again for hosting this panel. Look forward to hearing the testimony of all of our testifiers.
Representative Rob Kaufman, 89th District, Franklin County.
Carl Metzger, 69th District.
Representative Mary Isaacson, 175th District, Philadelphia County.
Representative Joe Hohenstein from House District 177 in Philadelphia.
Representative Pat Gallagher, 173rd Legislative District, Philadelphia, PA.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Burgos, Chairman Walker-Metzger, and other members of the House Consumer Protection, Technology, and Utilities Committee. Thank you for holding this hearing. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on the important topic of addressing exposure to per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, in Pennsylvania. My name is Ian Lauda. I'm the Southeastern Pennsylvania Legislative Coordinator for Clean Water Action. We are a national nonprofit environmental organization with roughly 80,000 members across Pennsylvania. Since our founding during the campaign to pass the landmark Clean Water Act in 1972, we've worked to enact strong protections for our health and environment by bringing issue expertise, solution-oriented thinking, and people power to the table. Pennsylvania has already taken some initial steps to tackle PFAS. In 2023, the Pennsylvania Office of the Attorney General filed a complaint in Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court against DuPont, Chemours, and Corteva for being in violation of Pennsylvania's consumer protection law. As part of this action, former Attorney General Michelle Henry cited that these companies continued production and distribution of products containing dangerous PFAS chemicals, thereby denying Pennsylvanians of their basic environmental rights under Article 1, Section 27 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. In 2023, the drinking water maximum contamination level for the most common constituents of these toxic chemicals was established. Just this year, all of you unanimously passed legislation that would protect our firefighters from the dangers of PFAS through prohibiting its use in firefighting foam and requiring labeling for turnout gear that contains it. These initial steps, however, aren't enough. The Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as the Pennsylvania Department of Health, have found associations between PFAS exposure and health effects like lower antibody response to vaccines, immune system suppression, increased cholesterol levels, pregnancy-induced hypertension, reduced fertility, liver damage, and increased risks of thyroid disease and the potential for cancer. We must build upon these efforts and seek to tackle new frontiers of exposure. A good vehicle for that would be passing legislation that prohibits the manufacture or sale of juvenile products, menstrual products, cosmetics, and dental floss in the Commonwealth that contain an intentionally added PFAS chemical. Clean Water Action and our members have supported such legislative efforts in past sessions. There we go. A study by the University of Notre Dame that was published this summer in the journal Environmental Science and Technology analyzed 59 feminine hygiene products. Here's what we learned from that study. They shockingly found 33% of period underwear and 25% of reusable pads had intentional PFAS use, meaning the chemicals had been put there likely to keep the products from leaking. While they didn't provide manufacturer names in their study, they did identify that the majority were US manufacturers. In addition, the scientists used newer technology to begin measuring neutral PFAS, which have no charge but are thought to be linked to the same health harms as ionic versions. This is important because neutral PFAS to this point have tended to fly under the radar, but can be more easily absorbed through the skin or even mucous membranes because they can more easily move through fatty tissues. The new testing found an alarming amount of these neutral PFAS chemicals in some reusable period products. When measured, the neutral PFAS there had much higher concentrations, not parts per trillion, not even parts per billion, but parts per million. Scientists at the University of Notre Dame conducted another study several years ago, which was also published in the Journal of Environmental Science and Technology, that found many cosmetics sold in the United States likely contain high levels of PFAS. The scientists tested more than 200 cosmetics, including concealers, foundations, eye and eyebrow products, and various lip products. According to the study, 56% of foundations and eye products, 48% of lip products, and 47% of mascaras tested were found to contain high levels of fluorine, which is an indicator of PFAS use in the product. 29 of the products with high fluorine concentrations were tested further and found to contain between 4 and 13 specific PFAS chemicals. Only one item tested listed PFAS as an ingredient on the product label. While this may be shocking to you, me, and the majority of Pennsylvanians, the fact is companies have known this for decades, that PFAS is dangerous. Yet they've turned a blind eye to that and have continued to manufacture and sell products with PFAS at our expense. Previously released internal industry memos and studies prove that industry knew for decades that PFAS was dangerous, bioaccumulated in the blood, and were linked to terrible illnesses suffered by those exposed, but they still did it. A story last year in ProPublica that was co-produced with The New Yorker documents how a 3M chemist showed executives back in 1997 that its PFAS chemicals were in people's bodies, something the executives already knew, by the way. How did the executives respond? By questioning the methodology, downplaying the findings, compartmentalizing the knowledge within the company, and reassigning the lead chemist and her team so they couldn't continue their research. Now industry is going to tell you that they can't meet the demands of the prohibition we're proposing. The fact is, they have already begun to meet these demands in 11 states that have adopted varying levels of PFAS prohibition policies. That's California, Connecticut, Colorado, Maine, Maryland, Minnesota, Nevada, New York, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington. Knowing all this, why would we continue to allow businesses to manufacture and sell products with intentionally added PFAS chemicals? Do we trust national retailers to dispose of PFAS-laden inventory in those 11 states and take the loss? Or could those products end up on our shelves in Pennsylvania where it's allowed? We need legislation that further protects the health and safety of Pennsylvania families from toxic products, increases consumer trust, and ensures that actions are not only taken in a timely manner, but that there's an appropriate oversight to make sure it gets done and gets done right. I encourage you to take up and support legislation that prohibits the manufacture or sale of juvenile products, menstrual products, cosmetics, and dental floss in the Commonwealth that contain intentionally added PFAS chemicals. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Ms. Stephanie Wayne. Also, pardon me, I'd like to acknowledge the members that we have online: Representative Malagari, Representative Hogan, Representative Mullins, Representative Williams, Representative Benham, and Representative Tomlinson. Next, Ms. Stephanie Wayne.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Wine. I'm the Clean Water and Conservation Advocate at Penn Environment. So we're a statewide, citizens-based environmental advocacy organization, and we work to protect clean air, clean water, and Pennsylvania's natural heritage with thousands of members across the Commonwealth. And I want to thank the committee and committee members and the chairs for inviting me to testify today. So over the last decade, and the health problems posed by PFAS, as Ian put it, are well established, but sadly our laws are slow to catch up. So PFAS are called forever chemicals because they're nearly indestructible and can build up in the environment and in our bodies over time. And they're now so ubiquitous that almost every American tested has these chemicals present in their body. And even exposures to small amounts over time at parts per trillion can have significant health impacts. This is a class of substances comprising thousands of specific chemicals under the umbrella of PFAS, which have been linked to kidney cancer, to thyroid disruption, immune suppression, reproductive issues, developmental issues, alongside other health problems. And preliminary research by the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH, looking specifically at a widespread PFAS known as PFOA, indicates absorption through the skin can have a similar outcome to ingestion, which is why it's so important that we look at PFAS not just in our drinking water, as the state is already beginning to do and the federal government is already beginning to do, but in the products that we use because of that absorption. And of these categories, most concerning for me is the presence of PFAS in products we use in the most intimate contact with our bodies and with our babies and young children. Given that we absorb PFAS chemicals at a much higher rate than previously thought, it's imperative that lawmakers pay special attention to the exposure risk to PFAS in baby products and personal care products. For baby products, it's specifically concerning because an infant's developing body is uniquely vulnerable to the impact of these chemicals. So testing of popular infant products done by the Environmental Working Group found PFAS not only in infant bedding, which is worrisome given the amount of time babies spend in their cribs, but also in bibs and in their clothing. And then testing done by Environmental Health News using an EPA-certified lab found that 40 brands of diapers tested, 23% contained organic fluorine, which is a strong indicator of the presence of PFAS. And because babies are uniquely vulnerable, that's particularly alarming to me, both as an advocate and a mother of a young child. They're uniquely vulnerable for a few reasons. Babies have thin and permeable skin that can absorb chemicals more readily. It's less thick and well defended. They're also vulnerable to endocrine disruption. So babies and young children are more vulnerable to the impacts that PFAS has on our hormones. The endocrine system encompasses all of the hormones, critical signals for growth, development, functioning of the human body. As a baby's body grows, it lays the foundation for all those systems for its whole lifetime. If you have endocrine disruption at that critical juncture, you're going to have far-reaching effects. And so there's a robust body of evidence that exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals on fetal, neonatal, and childhood growth and the development of the reproductive system can be linked to the early onset of puberty, with estrogen mimic effects linked to that in both girls and boys. So it sort of behaves like estrogen in the system. And early puberty's effects are far-reaching. There's mental health and behavioral issues. It also shortens the window for children to learn important things like language and math and critical life skills. There's also the immune suppression and reduced vaccine efficacy. Babies are particularly vulnerable to that because they have their naive immune systems are more susceptible to infections like RSV and influenza than healthy adults are. So we want their immune systems to be strong. And then also, if you're getting your kid vaccinated and you expect it will protect them from serious illness, it can have less of an impact if they've had a high exposure to PFAS. And finally, there's impacts on weight and metabolism. So pre- and postnatal exposure to PFAS has a positive correlation found between prenatal PFOA levels and IL-1 beta, which is a pro-inflammatory molecule that's linked to weight gain and to poor metabolic health. So we're not setting up kids for success if they're exposed to this early on. And as vulnerable as babies may be, the risk posed by PFAS and consumer products don't end as we age. PFAS exposure in adults is linked to immune suppression as well as prostate cancer, kidney cancer, testicular cancer, thyroid disruption to both male and female reproductive systems, high cholesterol, and poor metabolic health. But you find it in a lot of personal care products. Dental floss, we put it in our mouths. If our gums bleed, then the floss is coming into direct contact with our bloodstream. And yet, concerningly, dental floss brands often contain PFAS chemicals. Procter & Gamble's Oral-B contains PTFE, which is the same form that you'll find in a nonstick pan. Other brands contain Gen X, which is a form of PFAS. PFAS is also found in many types of cosmetic products. In testing done, so the Notre Dame testing, I'll note, 47% of mascaras, 55% of lip products, 63% of foundations. These are products we apply, like I apply daily, multiple times a day. They get absorbed through the skin. And finally, most concerning to me is the PFAS in menstrual products. So in addition to the reusable products, tampons, pads, and liners, these are products that we apply to some of the most absorptive parts of the body, and so they deserve a particularly high degree of scrutiny. Because pharmaceutical research has indicated that these particular membranes of the body allow chemicals to enter the bloodstream at 10 to 80 times a higher rate than the rest of our skin. And I could fill the next hour listing all the threats to human health, but I'll focus on one that's less discussed and most personal to me, which is the connection that researchers are now drawing between PFAS exposure and preeclampsia. So preeclampsia, it's a complication of pregnancy where dangerously high blood pressure combines with damage to the kidneys and other organs. It's the result of a dysfunction of the immune system in the placenta. It's the leading cause of maternal death in the United States and a leading cause of stillbirth. And recent research has revealed a compelling link between levels of PFAS in the mother and her risk of preeclampsia. And as someone who only survived preeclampsia recently in my pregnancy because of emergency medical intervention and who will live with the cardiac complications for the rest of my life, my strong feeling is that our own personal care products shouldn't put us at an elevated risk of cancer, of metabolic dysfunction, or of preeclampsia. And when it can have such a devastating impact on our health, it shouldn't be in our products. We should be able to trust what we go to buy from the store. And when Pennsylvanians are flossing their teeth, putting on lipstick, buying baby supplies, we shouldn't need to worry about this. And unfortunately, consumer vigilance just isn't enough because products can label themselves non-toxic, and that's not a regulated label. And Consumer Reports even says that many products labeled PFOA-free contain different types of PFAS, so it misleads even the wariest consumer. But fortunately, there are solutions. I know that there's bipartisan efforts now to phase out PFAS in baby products, menstrual products, cosmetics, and dental floss. So thank you to Representative Greg Scott, Representative Natalie Mihalik to lead that effort. And because it has this increased urgency for me, not just as an advocate, but as a mother, I would urge legislators to support legislation that makes sure I don't need to worry about if there's PFAS in the fabric of my daughter's footy pajamas, in her crib sheets, or in her diapers. So thank you for listening today.
Next, we'll hear from Ms. Katie Bloom, Conservation Voters of PA.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, chairs and committee. My name is Katie Bloom. I'm the Political and Legislative Director for Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania. We are an environmental advocacy organization dedicated to ensuring that all Pennsylvanians are protected from threats of pollution and have access to clean air, water, and land. This critical issue directly impacts the safety and health of our families, and with the amount of PFAS in everyday chemicals, everyday products that we use, it is really important that we address it. And I don't want to double up on some of what my colleagues have said, but I do want to lift up, as my colleague spoke a lot about babies, just children. Overall, they are a greater risk. They have a lower body weight. They intake food and water differently. And they have developing organs over time that can really be impacted by these chemicals. And one thing, as PFAS is in so many products, even though today we're talking a lot more about non-essential products, even screen protectors on cell phones can degrade over time. There are many household products that can degrade and become dust on the floor of your home that your children and toddlers, elementary school age folks, are playing in and around. And all of these products do degrade over time. There are also, not everyone can afford to replace these products. Not everyone can afford to get a very high-priced, all-natural product. I live in rural Pennsylvania, and Dollar General is the store. We don't have a lot of natural products at Dollar General that might not contain some of these chemicals that you see in these everyday cosmetic products. I also want to lift up that in Pennsylvania, we have seen increased advocacy, which we are very thankful for. As you heard, the amount of water testing and addressing those issues has increased. We have seen several bills. There is a bill from Representative Pugh on biosolids. There is a bill from Representative Isaacson on testing public water systems. There's the classification and cleanup of PFAS from Senator Collette, and obviously Representative Scott's bill, as well as the movement of Representative Monroe's bill about firefighting foam and addressing PFAS there. We do want to lift up the other places that Pennsylvania can move forward. Obviously, in consumer products, non-essential products, we have found that there is momentum, bipartisan momentum from this. We are also seeing this at the federal level, which we find incredibly encouraging. Just the other week, President Trump's EPA administrator, Lee Zeldin, also upheld a rule around PFAS and holding PFAS polluters accountable and continuing those processes that were established a few years ago in some of those rules, because the EPA also understands how important it is to remove these chemicals. Obviously, there could be a period of adjustment, and I do want to lift up, focus in on one of the bills that colleagues have referenced from other states, and this is from Minnesota, and it is Amara's Law. And it comes in several phases. And this is from a young woman who bravely battled cancer herself and took this on in Minnesota. And it would ban non-essential uses of PFAS and require manufacturers to disclose the presence of PFAS in their products. And so far, this is working in Minnesota. This is implemented in phases. At the beginning of this year, Amara's Law prohibits PFAS in 11 select product categories: cookware, dental floss, juvenile products like children's clothes, playpens, and toys. Phase 2 will take effect next year, requiring that all products containing PFAS meet specific requirements to ensure consumers are informed about what they are purchasing. Finally, Phase 3 will prohibit PFAS in all products unless deemed currently unavoidable. That phase will take place all the way in 2032, allowing producers time to adjust their supplies accordingly. It's a very comprehensive approach that, coupled with other legislation, Representative Scott's legislation, these are places that Pennsylvania can move to. There is no reason that our American ingenuity could not spur development of other products, the removal of these products, and still have the amount of use that we need out of these products to create new, safe, and cost-effective ways of doing things. And I have faith in our companies and our legislature that we will be able to get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we'll have Ms. Melanie Benesh from Environmental Work Group.
Good morning, Chairman Burgos, Chairman Walker Metzger, and other members of the House Consumer Protection, Technology, and Utilities community. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Melanie Benesh. I am a Vice President for Government Affairs at the Environmental Working Group. EWG is a national environmental health organization that has actually been working to address the harms for PFAS for more than the last 2 decades. So these chemicals have been around for a long time. They've been a problem for a long time. And I am so encouraged by the actions that states are taking to really protect consumers and consumers in Pennsylvania from the harms from these chemicals after such a long fight. So EWG is really proud to support this proposed legislation, which would eliminate some truly needless uses of PFAS from key consumer products that we bring into our homes. None of us consented to be contaminated with toxic chemicals that are so persistent that they are known as forever chemicals. Nevertheless, as some of my colleagues have already pointed out, 99% of us, including newborn babies, have PFAS in our blood. The potential health harms and the well-established health harms from PFAS have already been really well articulated by some of my colleagues, so I won't repeat them here. But instead, I will say, while we can't completely prevent exposure to PFAS because they are so pervasive in our environment, because they are so widely used, we can significantly reduce our exposure by eliminating some of these needless uses of PFAS in consumer products that we bring to our homes, just like the consumer products that are highlighted in this bill. By eliminating the use of PFAS in cosmetics, juvenile products, dental floss, and menstrual products, we are eliminating a key additive exposure, which is especially important for communities like the many communities in Pennsylvania that have already been disproportionately exposed to PFAS through their drinking water and their food. And let me be clear, we don't need PFAS to make our cosmetics waterproof. And we don't need PFAS to make our dental floss glide. We don't need PFAS to make our juvenile products be stain resistant. We don't need PFAS to make our menstrual products work. How do we know this? We know this because there are hundreds of companies that already make these products without PFAS, and even more that will be doing that soon. Sephora, Whole Foods, Credo, and many other companies make their personal care products without PFAS. Walmart and Amazon sell dental floss without PFAS. Major baby product brands like Bumble Ride, Chico, Kleck are made without PFAS. Salt, Nix, and other menstrual product brands do not use PFAS in their products, and some of them even regularly test for the presence of PFAS. And moreover, as one of my colleagues already alluded to, more companies are soon going to have to phase out or may have already phased out PFAS to comply with similar laws in other states. At least 10 states, representing more than a quarter of the U.S. population, have banned PFAS in some or all of these product categories. And because companies can no longer or soon will no longer be able to use PFAS in cosmetics, dental floss, juvenile products, and menstrual products in those states, many of those companies are going to phase them out nationally, making it really easy and cost-effective for companies in Pennsylvania to comply with this proposed law. But a state law here in Pennsylvania is the only way to ensure that all Pennsylvanians are safe. Some of these laws are already in effect. 8 states have banned PFAS in juvenile products, and the PFAS has been banned in the exact same set of juvenile products as proposed in this bill in California. And that law has been in effect for 2 years already, since July 1st of 2023. 10 states have already banned PFAS in cosmetics, and the laws in Washington and Colorado took effect on January 1st of this year, so companies have already phased out in those states. 4 states have banned PFAS in dental floss, and at least 7 states have banned PFAS in menstrual products. And these changes really cannot come soon enough for the residents of Pennsylvania who are already overexposed to these toxic chemicals. EWG does a lot of tracking of data. We map drinking water sites in military bases where there's PFAS contamination. So we know that there are 247 communities in Pennsylvania that have so far detected PFAS in their tap water, including 169 communities with PFAS in their tap water above the standards that were set by the EPA last year. Many Pennsylvania residents are drinking well water that's contaminated with unsafe levels of PFAS, including people living near military bases where PFAS was used in firefighting foam for many decades. PFAS has so far been detected in the groundwater of 18 military installations in Pennsylvania, including Naval Air Station Joint Reserve Base Willow Grove. Right now, nearly 1,300 Pennsylvania sites are likely using and likely discharging PFAS into the air and the water, and there are currently no real limits on these industrial discharges, and we are only beginning to understand the scope of those releases. And while some of the new federal limits, for example, on PFAS in drinking water, will significantly reduce PFAS exposures and save thousands of lives, parts of that national drinking water standard may be rolled back and may be delayed, making Pennsylvanians wait a little bit longer before they can be assured that what's coming out of their drinking water is safe. But we can act right now to eliminate PFAS in other products that we are bringing into our homes that really add to that exposure. And this is especially important because consumers cannot simply shop around the problem. The presence of PFAS is not disclosed on most of the products that we bring into our home. And this is a scenario where, in these particular product categories, I'm also not confident that the federal government is going to take action to eliminate the use of PFAS in some of these consumer products. So state action is really more important than ever to address some of these consumer exposures, these additive exposures. And the last thing I will say is, please don't believe those who insist that there are too many PFAS or that some PFAS are better than others, or that all PFAS have been thoroughly reviewed, or that some PFAS are not actually PFAS, or seek to turn this into a referendum on all uses of PFAS, or insist that changing formulas and recipes will make basic goods unaffordable. This is a bill that is focused on a set of consumer products where we know that PFAS are not needed, where companies have already shown us that these uses can be phased out, and we know it's going to make Pennsylvanians safer. And so with that, I say thank you so much for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Representative Isaacson.
Thank you. And I felt the need to speak as the only woman on this side. And listening to the testimony, makeup is an essential item. But we don't necessarily need these PFAS in these products to make sure that they're able to be useful. And I think that we should all be very concerned at the exposure of both women, 51% of the population of Pennsylvania, only represented by a quarter of the General Assembly, but that's just my side note. But for women and children and the exposure for these essential products, okay? Menstrual products are essential products. Products that our children are exposed to, from their clothing to their bedding, are essential products. I'm not suggesting that we're going to ban PFAS from products that necessarily need time and formulas to try and change things, but I think we should consider the importance of this legislation, considering it has been done in other states, in making sure that we're protecting the women and children in this Commonwealth especially. My one quick question after my noted point there. Is there any movement on the federal level with regard to the notification and warning that was discussed that is not used right now about PFAS being in a product? Do you understand my question? I think you brought it up, that there was no notifications that a product contains PFAS.
At the state level is what I was referring to, but I
On
think
the
my
federal
colleague has an answer.
I think for many of these product categories, New York did pass a state law requiring some menstrual products to list their ingredient list, but that's not true in every state and every market, making it difficult to shop around. For something like a juvenile product or something like a dental floss, you're not going to see an ingredient list right on the label. So it makes it really difficult for consumers to shop around. And then on the federal level, there are not any warning requirements around the use of PFAS in products, and there's some legislation around getting rid of very specific uses like PFAS in food packaging, but no wide-ranging proposals on these consumer products. And then PFAS in cosmetics has just not been a priority for the FDA. That office that handles personal care products at the FDA is very small, has historically been very understaffed. They are supposed to do a study on PFAS in cosmetics that I believe is already late, and I think will probably become more late just given some of the staffing reductions that have happened at the FDA. And then some of these might fall under the jurisdiction of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, but the way the Consumer Product Safety Commission works is to generally start with voluntary measures that often don't have the same kind of lasting impact as a regulation would. So what has really moved the marketplace on this product is state actions.
And I'll add to that, despite there not being a federal requirement for labeling, what that opens is that brands can then say and want to tap in to the consumer anxiety by doing things like saying PFOA free or PFOS free, and that's one of a class of roughly 9,000 similar molecules. And so it's saying it doesn't have that single PFAS. And so a consumer who's heard about these chemicals will say, oh, I want to buy those menstrual products or those baby products because it doesn't have PFOS. But because it's a class of chemicals, it could just as easily contain something that's quite similar and poses a similar health risk. And so there's a bit of a bait and switch that we see that right now companies can take advantage of. And so that's why we also strongly support in legislation addressing this as a class of chemicals versus going after simply PFOA or PFOS, because then you can make a small change and have a similar chemical that with a technically different name but a similar health impact, and the consumer is none the wiser. And so that's what you sort of in that when we see the lack of protections, then the advertising and the packaging can do a lot in that space. That's a little misleading.
Okay, thank you very much.
Representative Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering, so what makes corporations use PFAS? Is it simply economics? It's easier to make products with these molecules? This isn't a trick question. I see your mind going. I genuinely am curious why corporate America would use this if it's just, obviously they're not, I'm not, I don't want to subscribe anything nefarious. Is it economics? Is that what it is? Easier to make, cheaper to make? Could you address it?
I'm happy to take a first pass. Yeah. I think I think Ian alluded to this a little bit in his testimony, that there are a bunch of different applications for PFAS because from a functional standpoint, they're really useful chemicals. They make things stain resistant. They are heat resistant. They, make things nonstick. They can inject a lot of properties into consumer products that consumers really like. I think if you asked a consumer, is that utility of the product worth the additional health risk? I think consumers would say no. And then I think historically there has been a knowledge gap between the manufacturers of the PFAS chemicals who knew they were dangerous and the people that they were selling these chemicals to use them in their products. I think, someone who is just making a pan or making a cosmetic is thinking more about the function of the product and the consumer experience and less about the toxicity, and are sort of trusting the chemical companies not to lie to them about the toxicity of the chemical. We now know a lot more about the health harms of these chemicals, and I don't think anyone who is a downstream user of PFAS can now say that they don't know. But I think 20 years ago, someone who is formulating their product wasn't really thinking about the health risks of these chemicals, because they were assured by whoever was selling the chemical to them that it was safe and that it was going to make their product really useful, and then they sold it and consumers liked it. And then I am not coming from a business perspective, but my understanding is that there's a certain amount of inertia when it comes to product formulations, and just you've made something a certain way, you've always made it a certain way, you have suppliers that you have relationships with, and it's not actually that difficult to reformulate some of those problems, but the real hurdle is just kind of overcoming some of that inertia and having done things the way that you've always done them.
Okay, and you did mention how the products have been reformulated in certain states, and it seems to be working. Is there an extraordinary price differential with those products in those states versus other states?
No. Not that we've seen. And
take Maine. In rural Maine, is it different than rural Pennsylvania, which most would consider my area or Chairman Metzger's area, rural Pennsylvania? Is it a difference in pricing on these basic needs?
I don't believe so with this particular product categories and with the use of PFAS. In some cases, the extra functionality that PFAS is adding is not super essential. It's just kind of a nice to have, and you can just eliminate it, and so you're not actually replacing it with other things. But otherwise, there are similarly priced alternatives. A group of leading researchers just put out a database earlier this year that identified I think about 530 different alternatives to PFAS that are just like broken out by functional effect and product category. And so there's likely some variation among like how much each one of those alternatives would cost. But I think if you should be able to find what you're shopping for within the alternatives available. And then just as another example, some of the scientists at my organization in 2017 did a study on food packaging, so a different product category. But what they did is they went into a bunch of different fast food restaurants. They bought up food packaging, or they saved their food wrappers, and then sent them and tested them for PFAS. And what they found was about half of them had it and about half of them didn't. And what that told them is that the cost of the wrapper with PFAS and the cost of the wrapper without PFAS was probably about the same, because sometimes these were like within the same franchise, just different locations, and just, the use of PFAS in this product wasn't really impacting the price or purchasing decisions of those, individual franchise managers.
Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate your input and your testimony this morning. As a dad of four, and educating myself over the last 5 years on more health-related matters, and I feel guilty for some of the things that I exposed my own children to. But come January, I'll have my fourth granddaughter, and they'll all be 4 years old and under. I think of them when I look at issues like this, which, obviously, a conservative Republican, I've always, wanted to make sure we aren't over-regulating industry. But I still believe that. But I do believe that we need to be very cognizant of the health of our population as we see health metrics deteriorating for all Americans. We need to be very cognizant of this issue as many others. So thanks for your input this morning.
Chairman Metzger.
So obviously no one, supports the proliferation of a carcinogenic material, and we don't want to do that. I guess you had mentioned earlier, everyone here, I think, is on the same page of wanting a healthy product, but and you even mentioned it's a bipartisan bill, so we're all trying to work to the same effect. I guess at the end of the day, there's some practical considerations that I think that we have to look at to make sure that this works. And we're at the stage here where we have an idea, but we're trying to formulate the language for the bill, and that's why you're here, is to try and help us do that correctly. So 3 things that are probably the most difficult way to thread the needle on this bill and where we need your help the most. One is, of course, the Commerce Clause issue. How do we navigate that without having the ultimate bill thrown out because it's challenged federally? I think that's one thing that we really need your assistance on trying to figure that out. Second is, in the event that we would regulate the product line, that it would be pushed offshore. And I know it's shocking to a lot of people, but I think that some countries, China in particular, would lie about the contents of their product. And, if we would push these product production offshore, then we would be getting maybe an even worse product. I guess that's the second question. How do we avoid that problem where we're picking up a Chinese product that has more PFAS than we ever imagined and that says that it has none? And then, I guess the last thing that, we're concerned about is that if we're regulating it heavily and we have a small business, a dry cleaner, an auto shop, that is using a product, maybe unknowingly having that PFAS product in it, that they're not subjecting themselves to such high liability that's really outside of their control. They didn't know or don't have an alternative available. So those are the practical considerations of we're trying to make a bill that works for everybody, that can actually get done and over the finish line, that we really need everyone's help with trying to come up with solutions. So I don't know if you have answers to those questions today, but maybe in the future that's something that you can give us.
Does anyone want to weigh in?
I would just speak to the first thing that came to mind in terms of making sure this doesn't offshore things. And I know, federally right now there's an effort to incentivize and prioritize American manufacturing. And I think that if this is, I think it sort of undersells the American manufacturer to say this is something that we can't get right. Of course we can get this right. And a lot of the companies that are already doing this are actually domestic companies that can keep a really good eye on, soup to nuts, the entire process. And so I see no reason why we can't do that across more brands. But then also, there are already protections for, we don't want lead in our toys. And so and sometimes overseas manufacturers go beyond the level of lead that we want to see in America. But then we have inspections at the border that check for that sort of thing. And so I don't think there being sometimes a bad actor who might violate the law inherently makes it not a law worth pursuing. But I also I just have faith in our manufacturers to be able to, especially when we know there's that great list of the over 500, here's what we substitute out. I just think this is something we're able to get done. And so they're good things to think about, but I don't think that those are concerns that are necessarily a barrier to putting these protections in place, especially when other states are doing it. And the more the other states do it, the more that it can't be sold at a CVS in Washington State, the more it's going to end up on the shelves of a CVS here, which is what we definitely don't want to see.
Sorry about that. So the one thing I will add, though, Chairman Metzger, is I think in addition to what she just said, is that we're already seeing the incentivizing of American manufacturers with respect to this. Look at firefighting gear, right? Firefighting gear intensely made with PFAS chemicals. Obviously, we don't want our firefighters to get harmed. When they manufacturers of firefighting gear learned that this was an issue and that firefighters were dying of cancer at higher rates because of this gear, now we have PFAS gear. We have gear that is PFAS free, made in America. There's a New Hampshire company that released it. It's a little bit more pricey, a little bit more expensive, but it's incentivizing the American manufacturer. So I think we're going to continue to see that across the country and across all product lines, but we've already started to see it. There are examples of that already happening. Great point.
I'll add just a little bit. First of all, as I work in the government affairs team at EWG, but I do have a law degree, so I always love and appreciate a Commerce Clause question. And I'm pretty sure we do have a memo on this, but I don't have it at my fingertips, but that's something that we can probably provide to you. There are very similar, in some cases, identically worded parts of this proposal that have passed in other states that have not yet been challenged. I think because the Commerce Clause argument would fall apart. And then just on the sort of downstream liability and enforcement, I think the bill tries to deal with that by requiring the certificate of compliance to really put the burden on the manufacturer to say, I am making this without PFAS. And then if you buy from that manufacturer and rely on what they're telling you, then the onus stays on the manufacturer. I don't think downstream users are going to be punished for believing in good faith what was affirmed to them in a certificate of compliance by the manufacturer. So, but happy to think about ways to make sure that that's clear, that the downstream users aren't the ones that are responsible for enforcing this, that the onus really remains on the manufacturers.
Thank you.
Representative Hohenstein?
I'll waive off, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes the line of questioning from the members. Thank you all for testifying today.
Thank you.
Our next panel will include Mr. Steve Kratz of Pennsylvania Chemical Industry Council and Robert Simon, Vice President, Chemical Products and Technology for American Chemistry Council. Thank you, gentlemen.
Chairman Burgos, Chairman Metzger, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's discussion about PFAS and consumer products. My name is Steve Kratz, and I serve as president of the Pennsylvania Chemical Industry Council, representing the state's chemical and plastics manufacturing operations and associated industries. Pennsylvania's chemical, plastics, and support industries provide nearly 100,000 direct and related jobs. The industry contributes over $14.4 billion to the state's economy, pays nearly $2 billion in wages, and contributes $782 million in federal, state, and local taxes every year. Nearly every aspect of modern life relies on chemistry. Chemistry is responsible for healthcare products and medical equipment, renewable energy products, high-performing building materials, military equipment, food packaging, electronics, clothing, vehicles, and more. We appreciate the opportunity to participate in today's hearing to have a productive dialogue around PFAS and consumer products and to offer solutions where we can find common ground to advance effective, science-based policy that protects the environment and fosters growth. As a starting point, it's important to understand that a broad definition of PFAS encompasses hundreds of chemistries with very different properties and purposes. Many of these are essential to national security, supply chains, transportation, renewable energy, healthcare, and durable consumer goods. A few examples of PFAS uses include electronics and wiring insulation, medical devices, refrigeration, data transmission, automotive, aerospace, semiconductors, protective coatings, batteries and storage, and military equipment. The durable properties of PFAS are critical for responding to extreme temperature changes, hot or cold, to ensure that electronics don't catch fire, airplane components don't freeze and shatter, and military equipment can protect our nation. Fluoropolymers are used in construction for coatings, adhesives, and sealants for durability, and the low friction properties of PFAS are essential for medical devices like catheters, stents, surgical patches, and medical implants. The coolants used in air conditioners and refrigerators also contain fluorinated chemicals. While industry continues to explore certain viable alternatives for specific uses, the PFAS chemistries remain critical to these sectors because they are durable, stable, and can be used safely. The fact is that in the United States and other advanced countries, industry has already phased out legacy chemical compounds, including PFOA and PFOS, which have been the primary focus of concern and regulation. It's also important to recognize that PFAS chemicals have unique environmental and health profiles to consider when evaluating any regulatory or legislative proposal. First, it is critical to include an accurate science-based definition of PFAS to address the compounds of concern and allow for the continued use of durable, stable compounds for many critical uses. The other key area is to ensure that any legislation only addresses intentionally added PFAS. Finally, it's important to differentiate the different types or subcategories of PFAS. For example, one subset of PFAS chemicals, fluoropolymers, have been demonstrated to meet key safety criteria, not bioaccumulate, and to not break down into PFOA or PFOS, which are the primary areas of health and safety concern. Overall, it's critical to distinguish between addressing the specific issues related to public health and safety versus the negative impacts of an outright broad-based ban that is not warranted for this broad range of chemistry. For example, Pennsylvania regulates gasoline and plastic pens very differently. They each derive from fossil fuels, yet they're regulated at the appropriate level based on unique properties and risk profiles. That is the collective responsible approach we should undertake when evaluating the regulation of PFAS. In closing, PCIC fully supports the safe management of chemicals, including PFAS, and I'm confident that together we can advance science-based policies that drive impactful solutions. I would also like to thank Representative Scott. We had an opportunity to engage with him on his bill and find common ground and workable solutions, and we look forward to those continued conversations. And we also had the honor of working with Representative Monroe on his firefighting foam bill as well, which is now in the Senate, and as well as Senator Yaw, again, to find common ground and workable solutions. And we really appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony today, and we look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Simon?
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Burgos, Chairman Metzger, and members of the committee. My name is Robert Simon. I work at the American Chemistry Council, and my role is to help support product-specific issues in this space, and appreciate the opportunity to share information today for the committee's consideration, and hopefully we can be a resource as we go forward discussing some of these policy proposals. I have some written remarks. I think members have copies of that. In the interest of time, I would echo some of what you heard from Mr. Kratz, but also I thought I'd just jump to it. There's a lot of common interest here. We support the regulation of specific PFAS, and we support a lot of the regulation of specific end uses that you heard from panel one today. And I think that's where there's a lot of common interest in terms of focusing policy in the space. So I just wanted to sort of start with that. So while we support regulation, the two things that we would urge the committee as they're considering this is, one, recognize the differences within the chemistry. So PFAS is a broad term that's used to describe a broad range of substances, liquids, solids, gases, and it's just not scientifically accurate to treat them all the same. We don't do that in any other product category, and we would recognize those differences here. There are clearly substances we want to focus on, so that's one. Second, recognize the different uses. Regulation of a product like makeup is very different than an FDA-approved medical product. Recognize the different uses, and let's focus on those things that make the most sense. So again, we support the regulation of a lot of the chemicals you heard about in panel one. We support the regulation of a lot of the applications you heard about from the earlier panelists, and there's a lot of common ground here. Two other points that I'll just end with. So our industry has phased out. The reality is that the majority of things that we're talking about in terms of the PFAS space are things that have made their way into the drinking water and that present a potential risk to human health. We understand that. We agree with that. Our industry has phased those out. Those chemicals are not been produced in the US, Europe, or Japan for over a decade. And on top of that, not only did we phase out those chemistries, we entered into a partnership with the Environmental Protection Agency, their stewardship program, to also develop replacement chemistries underneath a legal enforced consent agreement where we had to develop. We spent over $1 billion to develop the replacement chemistries that didn't have the same properties as the things that were phased out. But you know what? And I think the panelists already said this today. Those are still made. They're still made in China. They're still used by manufacturers. That is the low-hanging fruit. We do not want those things getting into our drinking water. We want to focus on those things so that there's a level playing field, and I think there's a lot of common support for that. And then I'll just end with, there is growing recognition of the differences within this chemistry and the different uses. And a good example of that would be, this is at the state level, the federal level, and the international level. So at the state level, there's over 30 states that have enacted laws. And the majority of those states, over 95%, have taken a very focused approach. Here's the chemistries we're going to focus on. Here's the uses we're going to focus on. And that has led to, I think, more common sense policy that is effective and addresses the root issues. Two states, Minnesota and Maine, have taken an incredibly broad approach, and they are struggling. Just last week, the lead administrative law judge in Minnesota declared that the rules for just implementing the labeling and reporting provisions were deficient, and they're going to have to go back to the drawing board. So again, we support some of these efforts, but we want to have common sense approaches that factor in some of these key things. So I'll end there. Appreciate the opportunity today. We support regulation of this important chemistry, but we support it in a way that allows for the continued safe use where appropriate, and for recognition of those different uses that allow us to continue to enable some of those critical things, whether that be, defense applications, medical applications, green energy, et cetera. So appreciate the opportunity. Again, hope we can be a resource as the committee considers these issues.
Thank you. Representative Isaacson?
Thank you. And to start out, in my district, I have the Science History Institute, okay, which was started by the petroleum industry for its history, and they have understood and moved forward to understanding, showing the science as it evolves through history. And that's kind of the conversation that we're having. So I wanted to start that so that you don't think I'm coming under an attack here from my little lefty side. The discussion we had earlier with the first panel was talking about this bill focusing on products that are absorbed by humans, and a lot of focus was on women and children. I understand the science of, if somebody's going to get a stent in their heart, they want to make sure that it's the best possible product. But with regard to products, whether it's makeup, menstrual products, children's clothing, bedding, etc., is this something that, as you're going to be putting the weight of your support behind with regard to these things that are absorbed through skin, touch, feel, etc.? I don't think anybody here today is suggesting that we're going to do away with PFAS here in Pennsylvania, but this is a very specific area, and that's where I was wondering.
I can start, and then Rob can talk about some of the experiences in other states. I think the answer to that is yes. I think to Rob's point, it's figuring out how we do it in a way that doesn't have unintended consequences. For instance, like children's toys that have wiring in them, there could be PFAS in wiring insulation, and that's in there so that they don't catch fire. So then, it's the calculus of, all right, is it better to have PFAS in this Game Boy or to have, in a situation where they could catch fire? So things like that. So those are some of the details and in the weeds things that we can get into with the committee as far as, we're looking at juvenile products. How do we make sure that definition is narrow so it addresses your concerns, but doesn't have those unintended consequences of, things like wiring insulation, hard plastics that if you drop something, it's going to shatter, which then, results in sharp objects for children, which is no good. So things like that. So I think, and Rob can speak to it more, but there's definitely workable, solutions on the matter that the committee in the first panel discussed.
Yeah, and I would echo that. Two things. So again, we support regulation. We don't want PFOS and PFOA or any chemicals that have similar properties like that in products. We also don't want them, particularly in products like you've highlighted, that may have the greatest potential for human exposure. But there is this important distinction in terms of looking at the overall use. So I think Steve made a good example. Washington State looked at the same issue. They determined that the fluoropolymer used in that wiring insulation was actually a preferred alternative to other chemicals. So just wanting to be thoughtful and smart as we approach regulation.
Representative Hohenstein?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you all, thank the other presenters as well, and Rep. Scott for bringing this forward with Rep. Mihalik. I'm going to focus a little bit on one of the things that you said, which is this idea of being able to parse out and figure out where there are specific risks from specific chemicals in it. As an analog, when we are looking at controlled substances under criminal law, there are all these different titles. There are all of these very different technical descriptions of the drugs and the compounds involved. And I know in this scenario, there's an obstacle, which is so many of these are proprietary. So many of the chemicals that have been developed are under patents or under a particular type of companies or specific companies control, and that there's an incentive potentially not to be bringing this forward with specific regulations. So that's one thing I want to float out there. The other is, it's a point I think Rep. Isaacson made and a few of the other presenters made. There's a very distinct difference in a PFAS that ends its life cycle in a landfill or in even groundwater versus ending right with a person's body, and especially absorbed in ways that make that concentration in the human body that much more significant. I think that's one of the reasons we really focused last year on the specific risk to our firefighters, and I think it's another reason why we should be focusing on our consumers, our young people, women who are using products that they've always used that shouldn't be posing this level of risk to them. And I think that's one of those things where you had said there isn't a sense in the industry to appropriately find regulation. And to me, this seems to be one of those spaces. But I would like your comments, on those obstacles that are presented by things like patents and proprietary information, and then also the idea that what we're trying to do here is a different type of PFAS contamination than what is a lot of times for what folks look at, groundwater or landfills.
So I think that's a great example in terms of the reference to the analogs, and it is an important distinction. I think what we would come back to is, regardless of whether it's a proprietary product or not, if it's using those chemicals of concern, then it should be included. And so we agree, right? This is a broad class of chemistry, but there is unfortunately a lot of misinformation and misperception in this space. While there are lots of, and some people refer to thousands of PFAS chemicals, there are 683 registered underneath the U.S. Environmental Protection Act that you can use and import, right? So that's still a lot of chemicals, and we are not suggesting that you go chemical by chemical. But within that broader class, there are clear subcategories. So EPA, underneath their PFAS testing strategy, has recognized those categories, and you can quickly group those. And I'll just use one example. So you heard from Mr. Katz, fluoropolymers is one of those, and that is one where states, Canada, the EU have started to recognize, hey, all right, you know what? Those meet specific criteria that show they don't degrade, they're not bioavailable. If you are in that category and you can meet those safety criteria, that's right. Let's put them in a different bucket and treat them differently. And so I think there are clearly analogs, but separating those two and not letting whether it be proprietary or CBI information get in the way. If you're in that category and it's a category of concern, then we should be looking at that.
I don't have anything to add on that, but I would just say, and certainly a discussion for another day, is there is interest to in increasing recycling rates. You mentioned landfills and waterways, and certainly the industry has a big emphasis on making investments to increase recycling infrastructure, remanufacturing of used plastics and things like that, so we can also keep these materials out of landfills in the environment. So certainly a discussion for another day, but wanted to raise that as well.
Chairman Metzger for closing remarks.
No, I thank both panels for coming here today. It seems like there's a lot of common ground, and I think that there seems to be a commitment to get together to make sure that we reach that common ground. Obviously, on the chemical side, it's a definitional issue that we need to make sure that we're correct on, and then I think we can probably move forward with it. But thank you.
Thank you to all the testifiers today. We know what we did wrong as industry, as advocates, and the willingness of cooperation in this room is wonderful and a step in the right direction so that our grandchildren, Representative Kaufman, can have a better tomorrow. So thank you to all the advocates in the industry. Call this hearing adjourned.